The following is the exact federal courtroom testimony from the Sean Diddy Combs trial, as reported by Inner City, and should only be used for educational and entertainment purposes. Please use caution before proceeding. The mood became tense as Dawn Richard, a former Danny Kaine vocalist, took the stand. She wasn't simply another famous witness. She was a lady who had witnessed too much. The courtroom remained quiet until she spoke. After a terrifying description of a violent outburst that involved eggs, a pan, and a terrified Cassie Ventura curled up in the fetal position, Diddy's carefully manicured image was broken, and he leaned in close. This isn't just a trial, it's a reckoning, and the first week alone has been a cyclone of emotional testimony, buried trauma, and bombshells directed at his lawyers. They are talking, pacing, and according to witnesses, clearly losing it. We're delving into everything that's coming apart and how Diddy's empire might not weather the storm when Dawn Richard entered the room, revealing everything from audio, recordings to the eerie testimonials of former associates. The air-shift cameras in the courtroom didn't flash, but every jury, lawyer, and even Diddy himself focused on Dawn, who had been well known for years as one of the band's breakout performers. She was a former member of Danny Kaine, but she wasn't a pop singer in this room. She was a witness, and her testimony was going to blow the whole trial apart. Her demeanor was composed but serious, and she paused for a long time before responding to her first question. Then, like a floodgate opening, everything was revealed. She began by describing a terrifying 2009 episode in which she claimed Diddy came downstairs in his Los Angeles residence in a panic, looking for his phone. When Cassie was close by, she claimed that he demanded without asking, and that when she didn't answer quickly enough, he threw a skillet full of eggs at her. Her attempts to hide her face were heard in the gallery as he yelled at her and me. She recalled how she curled up like a kid in the fetal position. But that was only the start. She said that Diddy tried to kick Cassie when she was on the ground, then grabbed her by the neck and pulled her. Moments later, Dawn claimed to have heard glass break, but it wasn't just a sound. She claimed that there was fear in the walls. This wasn't Dawn speculating. She was there, she witnessed it, and she stated it under oath. And her testimony turned into the most graphic and unsettling first-person account of one of the most influential musicians reportedly lashing out in private while leading a wealthy and prestigious public life. Dawn revealed a trend that astounded onlookers even more than the skillet event. She claimed that this wasn't a single outburst, but rather a culture, a power structure, and a secret empire of dread concealed beneath the bright lights of red carpets and hit recordings. A man allegedly controlled all aspects of the women in his social circle, and Cassie most importantly. She required consent for everything Dawn stated, including where to sit, what to say in interviews, and what to wear. Dawn claimed that it went beyond micromanagement to psychological warfare, right down to what to eat during lengthy studio sessions. She recalled that Diddy allegedly fostered a culture in which women were simultaneously denigrated and idolized, shouting down to women in front of entire teams, holding meetings while just wearing his pants, and requiring awkward group rehearsals that would go on for hours without much food or rest. But Cassie accepted. The Dawn stated that he would discipline her by removing her from appearances, cancelling her performances, or simply ignoring her if she left the room without checking in or declined an assignment. One of the most disturbing aspects Dawn shared was how Diddy isolated Cassie for days while she waited for a call. She claimed that Cassie was deterred from calling friends and relatives because she was afraid her phone would be taken. Diddy would remind her, "You don't know how good you have it," whenever she showed frustration for security concerns. Reporters in the room initially took note of Diddy's body language while Dawn spoke. According to a source, he was calm, crossed his arms, and then frantically whispered to his legal team inside the courtroom. His lawyers handed him a pen and paper, and he shook his head, writing whatever it was. To make Dawn Richards' evidence even more dramatic, the prosecution followed it up with an unexpected audio recording that didn't show a mask breaking the control he had previously commanded. Phone call, not a voicemail, in which Cassie is said to have confronted one of Did's loyal allies in a desperate moment after they surreptitiously captured her during one of the Notorious. When Cassie's voice came through the speakers, the courtroom became dead. Her tone wasn't calm. Rather, it was frantic, furious pleading, and you could hear the panic in her breath. She reportedly shouted, "Delete it!" The threat was evident, and the terror behind it was much more audible, according to legal experts monitoring the case. "Swear to God if you don't, I'll," the sentence said. But the emotion didn't stop until you heard what happened next. A double-edged sword, because it depicted Cassie as emotionally unstable and maybe violent, but it also revealed something more profound: the psychological suffering of someone who has been pushed. The defense team sought to object, claiming the video lacked context, but the court allowed it to remain. This was the last resort of a person who had suffered years of humiliation and was finally lashing out, not for retribution, but for survival. Witnesses described Diddy's immediate reaction as his jaw clenched, his lips squeezed into a line, and his gaze flew between the audio device and himself as it played. At one point, he turned away from the screen. This wasn't just another bombshell. It was a window into how far Cassie had been pushed. Some say he looked like a man hearing something he believed would never make it to a courtroom, with a hand on his brow that were incriminating, but now it was the lived emotional destruction that came through in her voice. The audio created a picture that the jury could never see from a picture or document, and it caused Diddy to pull Dawn. Richards' appearance alone wasn't what made her testimony so compelling. It was also how she instilled dread in the courtroom by bringing up the now famous skillet incident and making it clear that this wasn't. She explained her outburst of anger as a part of a lengthy series of deliberate intimidation. Diddy didn't just lose his temper, she claimed, glaring directly at the jury. You could tell he planned how he reacted. He had completed it before to daybreak, explaining that there had been obvious tension in the house. The morning of the eye incident, Cassie was anxious, and Dodie was pacing around in frustration over a misplaced phone. Something changed in him the instant he thought Cassie might have moved it. He yelled her name so loudly that the walls trembled. Dawn remembered that Cassie had come downstairs from upstairs still wearing pajamas, and he accused her of stealing it right away. Then he flung the pan without thinking, and the room went quiet. Dawn hesitated, looking at the floor calmly, but you could feel the emotion seething beneath it. He hurled a skillet, a real one, she went on to describe how Cassie fell to the ground, her arms automatically protecting her head while Diddy supposedly stood over her yelling. And it hit her like a lightweight pot or some kitchen toy, a cast iron pan, still warm with meals. Dawn claimed that she moved forward out of instinct, but terror stopped her in her tracks. He turned to face me, and I swear, I've never seen eyes that vacant and unangry. Like if I weren't even there. Then, he allegedly pulled Cassie away. The glass upstairs broke a few minutes later, and when one of the prosecutors questioned Dawn why she hadn't stepped in, her response, "If I did, I honestly believe I wouldn't be here," struck like a sledgehammer. The time Dawn resigned, the prosecution's story had solidified, claiming that Diddy was not just domineering, but also violent, emotionally manipulative, and capable of psychological warfare. However, the defense wasn't going to let that go unchallenged. So the next day, they began a thorough cross-examination of Cassie. In an attempt to damage her credibility, they began by criticizing her history of mental health issues, including PTSD treatment, and Cassie didn't recoil when the defense brought up the topic of counseling sessions, claiming that they were indicators of instability rather than trauma. Instead, she leaned into it and replied, "Yes, I went to therapy because they brought up a previous rape accusation Cassie had made against someone else, one that never led to charges, and suggested that she had a history of making false accusations." Cassie insisted that it wasn't untrue, claimed that it was simply disregarded, and then hundreds of texts, some sentimental, some raw, some explicit, arrived. The defense selected a few lines that portrayed her as needy, obsessed, and even willing, saying, "I'll do anything you want, just don't abandon me." What does that imply? It indicates that I was brainwashed, which is what the abuse appears to have been. The stenographer even allegedly paused for a moment. When they put further pressure on her, they asked her about a FaceTime she supposedly stole from her now husband while she was sleeping with Diddy. They claimed that this showed she wasn't a victim and that she had choices. Cassie looked the defense lawyer in the face. People watched Diddy's reaction during this encounter, noting his tight shoulders, clenched mouth, and urgent mumbling to his lawyers, as if he was trying to regain control of a story slipping away from him. It was evident that whatever tactic his legal team had relied on, Cassie wasn't crumbling under duress. In fact, she was rising. And then the audio arrived, which was the most startling moment of the week, and it wasn't from a witness stand. Rather, it was from a recording that the prosecution said was taken from a former Diddy employee who used to work security at his parties. The recording contained a furious, panicked voicemail from the courtroom leaned in, and the audio showed more than just threats. Cassie was crying as she told one of Diddy's inner circle to remove the recording, or "I promise to God, I'll end you." It wasn't about power. Rather, it was about terror. The tape she was talking to purportedly showed her having a freak-off with Diddy and a man. She was hyperventilating, cursing, and her voice cracked under pressure, hardly coherent at times. The prosecution said that escort had turned into a kind of blackmail, not only against her, but also against numerous women in Diddy's inner circle. The films were insurance, and Cassie claimed to have discovered the video's existence after departing. The defense objected out of context, but the judge accepted it after the recording. Diddy's visceral reaction was that a lady was attempting to trash evidence that had been used to manipulate and humiliate her for years. "I was desperate," Cassie claimed, despite the defense's attempts to paint her as aggressive, because if that footage ever leaked, it would not only ruin my life, but also all I had worked so hard to achieve. Reclaim. One juror was allegedly observed wiping their eyes. The courtroom's response was swift. Diddy went pale, tapped his foot non-stop beneath the table, and leaned into his attorneys. If there was a recurring theme in the first week of the trials, it was that his empire was based on control, and for the first time, it was slipping from his hands. He spoke in his ear for a few minutes before pulling off his spectacles and hiding his eyes. The man behind closed doors was reportedly very different from the one the public knew as a music titan, philanthropist, and billionaire. And for the first time, the courtroom was turning into a site where the facade broke completely throughout the several persons close to Diddy. created a picture of a planned world of emotional dominance, where affection was used as a weapon and devotion was purchased rather than earned. Weak witnesses didn't just recount incidents of rage or abuse. They also described systems. A former assistant who testified under the nickname Monica revealed what it was like to work for a man who is concerned with his image, afraid of losing control, and willing to go to unsettling measures to retain his power. She talked of Diddy's peculiar regulations, such as having to avoid eye contact unless spoken to, and being told to tell Cassie a falsehood regarding Diddy's location. She also claimed to have overheard him asking a staff member to clean the girl up. Monica also recounted an instance where Cassie confronted Diddy in front of staff about being compelled to participate in another party following a party with a clearly drunk woman who was allegedly passed out in a hotel suite. Everyone froze, and Cassie went away with tears streaming down her face when freak-off Diddy allegedly laughed in her face and screamed, "You belong to me." These incidents weren't isolated. Outside of the courtroom, media outlets started using Diddy's previous interviews, in which he talked about partying and wild nights about using persuasion to create a story. Bad boy for life, but when viewed through the trial's prism, those clips abruptly stopped feeling like lighthearted anecdotes, and instead felt like confessions concealed in plain sight. Legal analysts pointed out that as the defense attempted to refute Cassie's the pattern of behavior controlling texts, controlled dynamics, the cycle of anger followed by lavish apologies, and the fact that each new witness eroded the credibility of that claim, even though participation in these events was voluntary, suggested emotional captivity above romantic relationships, which prosecutors claimed was the most evil aspect of it all. Not the overt violence, but the normalization of it. Cassie didn't stay because she enjoyed it. Rather, she stayed because she failed to remember that she could have left the jury, as she saw these stories play out like scenes from a psychological thriller. And Diddy, who had earlier entered the courtroom with a swagger and confidence, now sat silently while a man was gradually stripped. As the second week of the trial approached, everyone's attention was focused on one person, Aubrey O'Day, a former Danny D. Kane singer who had previously spilt bombshells about Diddy and was well known for speaking her opinion. Her testimony was expected to be explosive because she had never spoken in court or under oath, and it did not let anyone down. Aubrey approached the stand with obvious emotion and started by telling the court about her experience making the competitors were routinely humiliated, yelled at, and threatened with expulsion for minor offenses in the band, where Diddy allegedly managed the program like a military camp. She said it was less about creating stars and more about breaking wills. But what transpired after the cameras stopped was what surprised the courtroom. Aubrey claimed that Diddy monitored his female musicians, including Cassie, whom she claimed she once entered on. Diddy allegedly hurled a laptop at the wall, shattering it inches from Cassie's head, then yelled at her in a soundproof studio area, accusing her of being dull and ruining his mood. Aubrey added that many of the Cassie claims that several women in Diddy's circle, including assistants, stylists, and even background dancers, were invited to private events where boundaries were blurred and consent was not strictly enforced, proving that the freak-offs described in her earlier testimony weren't unique to her. The most startling detail, which is frequently taken for granted, was when Aubrey talked about a gathering in Miami where, in her words, Diddy invited male executives to try the food. When asked what it meant, Aubrey hesitated. Prosecutors asked Aubrey if she had ever witnessed Diddy doing drugs around these women. She nodded, saying that the ecstasy MDMA coke was like candy. And then she turned straight to the, when someone controls your music, finances, body, and future, you're not just in a relationship, you're in prison. That's why the jury members kept questioning why Cassie stayed. Diddy allegedly covered his face, with reporters characterized his body language throughout this portion of the hearing as sinking inward, as if he was taking in blow after blow from a statement that he had long hoped would never be made public. But it was, and the picture of by the end of the first week, the fun-loving mogul was rapidly fading, and the prosecution had done what few believed was possible. They had made one of the most unassailable personalities in the music industry a defendant at risk of collapse. Legal experts stated that the case was no longer about a single instance of abuse, but rather about a system of control and a culture that was established and upheld. The weight of the evidence was not only factual, it was also emotional and psychological. By Diddy, in which women weren't partners, but rather players in a machine he set up. Several former workers have since verified the existence of videos of sexual encounters, and additional witnesses have stated that Diddy mentioned these recordings served as his proof that the chilling term was used repeatedly in court. In the meantime, Diddy's defense team frantically changed their strategy, calling character witnesses and playing old interviews. Prosecutors countered by displaying Cassie's emails that presented a different image. Each time Cassie praised Diddy, arguing that she had profited from the relationship and stayed for the lifestyle. The jury wasn't just listening, they were also watching Diddy shrink in his chair, and she wasn't enjoying the ride, since she didn't know how to let go. Out of shame or obligation, witness after witness stated that the man behind the music and the celebrity was power hungry. The week's high point was when the prosecution presented a list of more than 60 ongoing lawsuits that women were accusing Diddy of anything from human trafficking to psychological abuse to sexual assault. At the time of the claimed event occurred in a dead courtroom. The judge paused in silence, for the Diddy stood slowly, eyes down, for the weekend. Being escorted away while dodging camera sweep 1 was over, and for the first time, Diddy was not in charge of he was the one confined within the scenario.